Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today I am reviewing The Eaters of the Dead by Michael Crichton, known later under the title The 13th Warrior after it was adapted into a film. So let's go over what Michael Crichton actually was doing in this book. So it is based on the account of Ibn Fadlan in the 10th century, when Ibn Fadlan was sent from Baghdad to the king of the Bulgars in an ambassadorial role, and got sidetracked on the way when he met a group of Vikings whom he referred to as the Rus in Eastern Europe. So the thinking is that some Swedish Vikings went all the way into what is now Ukraine and settled the region and were known as the Rus and eventually gave their name to modern Russia. At any rate, Ibn Fadlan, this was an historical figure who did make this journey. And the first few chapters of The Eaters of the Dead are based on this journey, which we have in fragments. We don't have the original manuscript, but we have later copies of the manuscript and fragments. So we don't have the entire thing. But yeah, so the first few chapters of The Eaters of the Dead, the first 3 or so, are based on this account by Ibn Fadlan. And one of the more famous episodes from Ibn Fadlan's historical account of his journey is a Viking funeral, or a funeral of a Viking leader, involving human sacrifice among other things. So it is quite a vivid and often cited account. Now, what Crichton does is he takes Ibn Fadlan on a much longer, completely fictionalized journey all the way to Scandinavia. And he also weds this fictionalized journey to the Old English poem Beowulf, which is also set in Scandinavia, although much earlier, probably in the roughly 500s or so. Nevertheless, Crichton puts an interesting spin on the Beowulf story, interpreting some of the moments in Beowulf in a most creative manner, particularly when it comes to the monsters of the poem, whom he transforms into the Vendel, which are the kind of the baddies of this tale. They are the ultimate other, an other that brings together even an Arab who has had several moments of cultural clash with the Vikings that he is accompanying. So, has always been the most willing companion, but it is quite a fascinating journey that Michael Crichton takes him on. One thing I want to emphasize is that one should not take The Eaters of the Dead in any way whatsoever as historical. It is fiction, absolutely fiction, though those first several chapters are based on Ibn Fadlan's account. The rest of it is completely fiction, and there are lots of elements of it that are actually not historically accurate. I'm going to throw one out there: the ubiquitous and always willing slave girls among the Vikings. That part of it has actually aged pretty badly, although the story as a whole has actually aged fairly well. But there are various things that Michael Crichton just completely made up. Some are highly speculative, such as the inclusion of the Neanderthals. But keeping in mind that all of this is very much fiction, I have a lot of positive things to say about this story, which is very well told, and it's very different in many ways from what I expected, and different from modern novels and storytelling. So first thing I want to talk about is the perspective offered by Ibn Fadlan as an outsider. And this is pretty valuable, I think. This allows Crichton to set up some interesting dynamics. First of all, between Ibn Fadlan and his companions, the Vikings that he's with, and their expectations, their cultures, their norms. Sometimes they clash and sometimes they mesh together very well. But it's fun to watch the internal journey of Ibn Fadlan as he comes to understand his companions and perhaps grow in respect for them as well, and even identify with them. even though in the beginning he sees them as essentially filthy, unwashed heathens who are incredibly violent if brave. Crichton also has fun with the fictional footnotes. The footnotes in there are very convincing, but they are largely fictionalized. Even allusions to modern historians and that sort of thing, Crichton just made it up. But he did a brilliant job of it, actually, because he made it sound exactly like the sort of dry tone that you would have in an academic sort of journal or book. So he did a brilliant job. It's very convincing, but it is entirely fictional, or mostly fictional, I should say. And he also does a great job of imitating the tone of the medieval travelogue. Ibn Fadlan's voice is that of a much more ancient person, the way they would have gone about observing their surroundings. And for the most part, it's foreign to the way we would tell the story. And this has upsides and downsides. There is the upside of giving the story a kind of fake authenticity, which is absorbing and interesting and immersive. But at the same time, this is to the detriment of, say, the action, which is much more brief than we would be used to in modern storytelling, where if you read a modern fantasy or historical fiction, you're going to get some good descriptions of the swords clashing and the blood welling and all that stuff, whereas in the more ancient accounts, it's very cut and dry. It's just so-and-so killed so-and-so, and that's about all you get. So, and Crichton goes a bit closer to the way that the ancient chroniclers would have described battles and such. So that might be disappointing if you're looking for a really action-packed kind of read. And although I will say that even though it is a bit drier, perhaps, than we're used to, Crichton, the fact that he's having so much fun with all of this made me smile a lot, and I found it an engaging read. So yeah, you'll miss the action, but the plus side is that you do get this rather fun, it's not quite a satire, but it kind of is in a way, particularly if you're used to reading academic type of writing. So I thought that was really fun. As far as the characters go, in addition to the kind of dryness of tone, you have very flat characters, and that is very much in keeping with the way a story would have been told by a medieval chronicler or someone like Ibn Fadlan. So the characters are very flat. You don't really get to know them. Among the 13 warriors, almost all of them have zero distinct personality. There are a couple exceptions there. Ibn Fadlan himself, whom we do get to know, his personality does poke through the very dry chronicle that we're getting here. And even actually quite a bit of humor. I enjoyed the humor. It's subtle and very dry, but it's in there. Another exception would be Herger, the translator for Ibn Fadlan, and interestingly, the book, although I have watched the film previously, and it does, I remembered a lot of the film as I was reading the book, so there's a very close correspondence in some ways, but that iconic scene, that pastiche of Ibn Fadlan hearing the Vikings and learning their language, that's something they put in the film. So I was kind of hoping that would be in the book. It wasn't there, and probably for the better, because it isn't entirely realistic, but it's a great iconic scene in the film. One of the few that doesn't come from the book. But nevertheless, the relationship that Ibn Fadlan has with Herger, who is his translator, the Viking who can understand, I believe it's Latin. He doesn't speak Arabic, but he speaks Latin, and Ibn Fadlan also understands and speaks Latin, so Herger serves as his translator. And the relationship that develops between Ibn Fadlan and Herger is definitely the most vivid in the story, because Herger serves as a representative of the Viking culture, and his interactions with Ibn Fadlan really are the ways in which we see the differences in perspective, and how they each call each other idiots and fools and that sort of thing. And then there's this sort of rough but affectionate friendship that develops between them. And it's a lot of fun. that relationship is really well done. The other interesting relationship and the other character among the 13 warriors, the one who stands out as having something of a distinct personality, is Beowulf, who is the hero of the tale, I suppose. And we get Ibn Fadlan's more distant perspective on him. He is not as close to Beowulf as he is to Herger. So the vividness isn't there in the relationship. But Beowulf, he serves as a kind of, I suppose, symbol of heroism among the Vikings. He is the alpha dude in this group. And he embodies the ideals that are being explored, the ideals of the Vikings that Ibn Fadlan is coming to know, and although he thinks of them as strange in some ways, he also is coming to appreciate them and admire them. So that also is an interesting relationship. The rest of them, so-and-so dies, I'm like, yeah, I don't really know who that is. And that, again, is in keeping with the ancient chronicler type vibe that Crichton was definitely going for in the book. As far as the themes of Beowulf coming through in Crichton's version of the story, I think Crichton does a really good job, actually. And he adds his own themes as well. The prominent one that Crichton adds in here is the idea of culture clash, but also recognizing oneself in the other. And that is probably even more so than the physical journey, one of the more fascinating aspects of this particular story. And along with it is sort of a side thing of civilization as represented by Ibn Fadlan, who comes from a much more sophisticated and urban culture, alongside the barbarism of the Northerners, the Vikings. And it's interesting because Ibn Fadlan as he comes to understand their ways, he comes to respect them more and to see value in them, and to understand that their experiences and perspective can offer truths and insights that aren't as accessible to him as someone who comes from a more sophisticated urban culture. So that's a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. And themes that would be familiar to readers of Beowulf include loyalty, which is something that develops beautifully between Ibn Fadlan and his fellow warriors, the Viking warriors, particularly when it comes to Beowulf, their leader, and their feelings about him and his place among them. Also, there's bravery, which is, I think, a great theme in here, and the idea of courage is explored in some interesting ways. Courage being something that you can't have if you're not familiar with the sensation of fear. So courage in the way of overcoming fear. Also sacrifice and the nature of heroism and the idea of glory and renown and the classic Old English and Viking theme of doing great deeds so that one's name can live on in the voices of the bards and that sort of thing. So as a response to mortality, which is something that Ibn Fadlan definitely thinks about as well. So mortality is a big part of this, the violence of life in those times and how to make the most of it. So also the sorrowful passing of the individual, as well as perhaps an entire culture. And so he does some interesting things with religion in there and the differing perspectives of the Vikings and Ibn Fadlan, who is a devout Muslim. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that Crichton does in here. It is a book I'm very glad to have read. It's a very fast read at 200 and... well, if you read all the appendices, which you should read, I think my copy at least, it was around 270 pages or so, and with pretty big print and small pages. So very quick read, a lot of fun if you're interested in a slightly different take on the Vikings. It's definitely something I would recommend. Also, just for the intercultural communication that happens in there as well. So I really enjoyed that facet of it, the coming to know one another in spite of our differences and seeing the common humanity. Although I will say that the Vendel never really get that. They never really have the same kind of sympathy. They remain the ultimate other in the story. So although Ibn Fadlan and the Vikings come to understand one another, there is not a whole lot of understanding for the Vendel. They're just, yeah, creepy and scary and bad. But that about wraps up my thoughts on this one, and I do thank you for watching, and until next time.